If America is traveling on a journey, it has progressed far from its original starting point, where only white, landowning men could vote. During the Reconstruction era, Congress passed the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, the 14th Amendment, which secured birthright citizenship and equal protection of the laws, and the 15th Amendment, which granted black men the right to vote. Civil rights legislation later sought to strengthen those protections. And yet, these grand declarations of inclusivity are frequently undermined by resistance to progress. Despite abolition, many white Americans sought to maintain a racial hierarchy. Some may be surprised to learn that President Lincoln claimed in an 1858 speech there was a physical difference between the white and black races that forbid the two races living together on terms of social and political equality. While historians often refer to the 16th president as the Great Emancipator, because of the executive order he signed abolishing slavery, he endorsed a white supremacist ideology that relegated black people to a lower status. As long as black and white people lived in the same country, Lincoln was in favor of having the superior position assigned to the white race. He envisioned a society where black people would either leave the country, a position he supported as a member of the American Colonization Society, or remain second-class citizens. Newly freed black people quickly learned that freedom was not synonymous with equality. After the Civil War, white people often engaged in acts of violence to deter black people from exercising their right to vote. Their goal was to keep the control firmly in the hands of white citizens. For instance, after the 1866 New Orleans massacre, editors of the Times-Picayune asserted that the white races of Louisiana will remain masters. They were referring to a tragedy that occurred on July 30th. Black people and some of their white allies were ruthlessly attacked in the French Quarter during a celebration of their newfound freedom and voting rights. The violence erupted in front of the New Orleans Mechanics' Institute when white agitators harassed and assaulted members of the procession. Once Sheriff Hayes arrived, he ordered police to fire into the mostly black crowd, killing dozens of citizens. As Secretary of War Edwin Stanton wrote of the event, "The police, aided by citizens, became the assailants." In addition to acts of violence, state laws curtailed the rights afforded to black citizens. For instance, Governor Francis T. Nichols signed the Separate Car Act of 1890, requiring railroads to provide separate accommodations for the white and colored races. This legislation is a prime example of efforts to formally segregate American society. Editors of the Crusader suggested on July 19th of that year that this legislation was a form of punishment against people of color advocating for equal rights. While the end of slavery was supposed to represent social progress, much of the black community continued to languish under white supremacist-controlled state governments. As the editors noted, the Negro stands in the same relation with the white as that which, according to the fable, exists between a wolf and the lamb. There was a broad assumption that the Negro had no rights, despite federal legislation asserting otherwise. In the same edition, authors revealed a story highlighting black Southerners' diminished social standing. Near Oak Ridge, L.A., a party of 36 Negro laborers, who were moving from this state into Arkansas, were cruelly shot upon by a mob in pursuit. 7 more killed and 6 wounded. The rest were forced to return to the plantation. No one was ever arrested or held accountable. This narrative shows why ending slavery did not automatically improve the conditions for many black people living and working in southern states. Efforts to leave and improve their conditions were often met with violence. Many white people believed the country should only benefit them. In reflecting upon this mass murder, editors asked, "Are we in slavery times?" Disappointed at how the promise of freedom had yet to be realized 25 years after the Civil War. As America travels along its path, citizens must decide whether to advance toward a more inclusive society or return to its prejudicial founding. Some want to return to a version of American society where black citizens have fewer rights, where girls and women had fewer opportunities to pursue an education or career outside of the home, where businesses could legally discriminate. In 1966, for example, former President Ronald Reagan said, "If an individual wants to discriminate against Negroes or others in selling or renting his house, he has a right to do so." Reagan's comments illustrate why civil rights activists fought to pass the Fair Housing Act of 1968. As his comments suggest, some wanted to maintain the legal right to discriminate. Without civil rights legislation and a federal government willing to enforce those protections, black people were subjected to the whims of white prejudice. Those who overlook black history may not fully appreciate why a slogan like, "Make America Great Again," rings ominous for the black community. However, after reflecting upon this nation's past, it's clear that our better days are not behind us. They are, indeed, ahead of us. To those caught up in the rapture of nostalgia, the past may seem ideal. Nevertheless, rhetoric that suggests the cost of living was cheaper back then and that Americans were happier ignores the racism that black people endured in each generation. It's fine to say, "Let's work to lower the cost of living." Indeed, most would agree this is an admirable goal. But to specifically evoke a particular era where marginalized groups had fewer rights is problematic. To those well-versed in black history, such a mantra is a clear threat to racial progress. Black people have long understood the threat of backward thinking. For instance, an 1865 edition of the Black Republican warned it's madness to ever think of enslaving us again, unwilling to relent in their hard-fought progress. Editors added, "We are not satisfied with our freedom alone." Without equal rights and opportunities, the promise of freedom rang empty. From their perspective, there was no historical period worth returning to. If you find yourself at the bottom of a pit, the only direction you want to travel is up and out. Sadly, there are still some who want America to return to an era that was only great for white people. For example, David Duke, a neo-Nazi and former Grand Wizard of the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, explained in 1978, "Our clear goal must be the advancement of the white race and separation of the white and black races. This goal must include freeing of the American media and government from subservient Jewish interests." Some endorse the belief that this country belongs to white Christian people and that no one else truly belongs. As the award-winning novelist Toni Morrison once said, "In this country, American means white. Everybody else has to hyphenate." While black citizens identify as African Americans and Asian citizens call themselves Asian Americans, for instance, white people are the only ones who do not need to hyphenate. No white person born in this country ever says, "I'm European American," because their whiteness implies a level of belonging that others are not automatically afforded. Last year, in a political rally in New Hampshire, former President Donald Trump referred to his political enemies as vermin, and immigrants from Central and South America as animals, and not people, during an Ohio rally, seemingly echoing World War II Nazi rhetoric. Such dehumanizing language demonstrates how some people's view of citizenship has become intricately tied to the social concept of whiteness, so that those who are not white are seen as less worthy of citizenship and, by extension, civil rights protections. At a recent campaign rally in Greenville, North Carolina, former President Donald Trump argued, "We have to go back to 1798. And cited the Alien Enemies Act as the legal premise to implement his mass deportation plan. However, by referencing this period in American history, Trump's speech evoked an era where black people were reduced to chattel, and xenophobic policies reigned supreme. While some white people prospered during this era, it's a mistake to credit their prosperity with the removal of immigrants. If we aspire to return to the past socially, we will travel in the wrong direction. We're left with the daunting question of why some people want to return to a version of America that was only great for white people. Those driven by nostalgia seem blinded to the imperfections of that time. By focusing on their group's prosperity, they overshadow the experiences of other groups and minimize their relevance. Others want to see a return to the past for self-serving reasons, as this period afforded more privileges exclusively to white people. Those who feel threatened by demographic changes may feel inclined to cling to the past and avoid discussions about racial inequality. Nevertheless, our progress should not be tapered by short-sightedness. Traveling forward is not guaranteed, but it is possible, especially if Americans are willing to apply the lessons history generously provides.